The Israel Defense Forces besieged Gaza City some months ago. Since then, the IDF has been successful in apprehending numerous attackers. The war rages on, and the world keeps demanding a ceasefire. Nonetheless, because he does not believe in Hamas, Netanyahu has not yet consented to a ceasefire. Amidst all of this, the IDF today initiated a fresh round of attacks against Hamas. Let's examine what transpired. Upon arriving in the center of Gaza City, the IDF increased its "now Hamas is having a terrible time figuring out where to flee." The tunnels were once home to Hamas, but many of them have since been found and destroyed by the IDF. Hamas can no longer feel secure using the tunnels. Israel launched an overnight offensive on the Gaza Strip, encompassing Rafah. These attacks were really intense. Late at night, the Israel Defense Forces began a massive offensive in Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. The IDF was informed about tunnels in the vicinity by Hamas members who turned themselves in at Nasser Hospital the day before. Last night, the IDF concentrated its attacks on these tunnels. This swift and devastating onslaught claimed several Hamas lives. In Zaytun, in the northern section of the Strip, the 215th Artillery Regiment reportedly attacked about 10 Hamas tunnels, according to the IDF. Apart from the tunnel attacks, the IDF also used airstrikes to encircle the enemy. The IDF entered the tunnels right after the incident and killed numerous Hamas members. About 20 agents were eliminated in the area by the 401st Armored Brigade. After these tunnels were completed, the IDF demolished them. Then, in the center of Gaza, the IDF discovered and destroyed a missile launcher. Following the IDF's announcement that Hamas had mainly beaten its fighting force in northern Gaza, evacuated its forces, and shifted its attention to smaller operations on pre-designated sites, the operation in Zaytun took place. Specified regions in Gaza's southern Khan Yunis. Over 15 Hamas operatives were eliminated by the 7th Armored Brigade. The army claims that the Givati Brigade ambushed a Hamas cell with sniper fire. A cache of Hamas weapons and documentation was discovered by the Commando Brigade. The IDF further stated that the Navy attacked Hamas and Palestinian jihad ships in southern Gaza. The IDF is keeping a close eye on Rafah as it gets ready for a potential strike. In the meantime, Palestinian media sources claimed that Israeli airstrikes on the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip throughout the night killed at least 3 people. As per the sources, the localities of Al-Shabura and Al-Jina were the main targets of the strikes. The Health Ministry, which is under Hamas control, reported that 99 individuals had died in the Gaza area over the course of the previous night. The world community is calling for a truce between Israel and Hamas as the number of civilian casualties in Gaza rises. Expanding. During discussions at the G20 meeting in Brazil the day before, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan urged the international community to become more actively involved in advocating a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian issue and a truce in Gaza. On that day, Fidan emphasized the necessity of putting an end to the horrors in Gaza during a conference of foreign ministers in Rio de Janeiro. Simultaneously, Fidan met with his counterparts in the US, Germany, and Egypt to deliberate on how to bring about an instant truce and expand assistance to the area. Fidan and US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken talked about how to quickly reach a complete ceasefire. Annalena Baerbock, the Foreign Minister of Germany, was also met by Fidan. Fidan made the following remarks: "Reform is necessary, as demonstrated by the UN Security Council's inability to adopt a resolution calling for a ceasefire." Turkey has been a strong opponent of Israel's fight against Hamas in Gaza ever since the Middle East war began, and backed efforts to have Israel tried for genocide in the World Court. Turkey has made repeated calls for a ceasefire in this regard. According to War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz, efforts are being made to reopen talks for a potential ceasefire in exchange for the release of Israeli hostages. Captives, Gantz persisted, and the early indications point to potential advancement. This is the first sign that talks have resumed with Israel since they collapsed a week ago. But Gantz restated Israel's promise to attack Rafah on the ground in the forthcoming Muslim holy month of Ramadan in the event that Hamas refuses to free the Israeli prisoners that are still held in Gaza. Israel thinks that some of the leaders and hostages of Hamas are in Rafah, along with the organization's final battalions. The Palestinian people are always on the move due to these attacks. Egypt, a neighbor, has been tremendously troubled by this. Recently, Egypt started constructing a sizable walled enclosure around its border made of concrete. Egypt thinks that the purpose of this wall is to control the large-scale Palestinian refugee inflow that comes through the Rafah crossing point on its eastern border. The impending military attack by Israel on Rafah poses a potentially significant issue for Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. The possibility of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians being uprooted from this volatile area and relocated to his nation has the potential to drastically upset an already precarious political climate. An important worry for Egyptians is the possibility of the Gaza conflict spreading. Aggressor groups have been attacking Egyptian military posts in the Sinai Peninsula on a regular basis since 2013. Sisi does not need a big influx of traumatized and displaced people. Traumatized migrants. However, as Israel intends to take Rafah, the site of over 1 million Palestinians gathering, and Palestinian casualties are expected to approach $30,000, it is more likely that refugees will penetrate Sinai. Sisi is fully aware of the humanitarian crisis that is occurring just across the border and has openly denounced Israel's military assault on Gaza. The boundary. However, he is unable to act quickly and selflessly in order to assist the desperate Gazans who are escaping the fighting due to two significant issues. To begin with, Egypt is unable to accommodate a significant influx of Palestinian refugees. Given their popularity at home, the large presence of Islamist groups ideologically aligned with Hamas and the Muslim Brotherhood would be extremely dangerous, on top of coping with a decade-long conflict in border areas that would have to accommodate migrants. Even though the election was won in December 2023 with 90% of the vote, it was thought to be the most rigged ever. Faulty as of yet. Leaders of the opposition were detained and Sisi's critics were condemned. It might be risky for Sisi to accept the flood of Palestinians, many of whom are Hamas supporters. Given his ruthless suppression of the Brotherhood since the 2013 military coup that overthrew former President and Brotherhood leader Mohamed Morsi, he has every right to be anxious. Mohamed Morsi add to this the flawed economic model of Egypt. It is now the International Monetary Fund's, IMF, second-largest debtor, and is presently negotiating an increase in loans. By the end of 2023, unemployment had remained steady at 7%, while inflation had skyrocketed to an astounding 38%. Egypt lacks the financial and political commitment to manage the large-scale influx of Gazan refugees across its borders. If there is sufficient support from the world community, Egypt may be persuaded to provide either temporary or permanent shelter for the individuals in question, a housing option that is either temporary or permanent. Persons who have been displaced from Gaza. In the past, it has exhibited behavior that is comparable to that of the transaction, which serves a certain function. It is possible that Sisi will arrive at a similar understanding by leveraging the Gaza conflict to handle Egypt's worsening economic conditions in exchange for assistance from Europe or the United States. Nevertheless, this is not a solution that will be effective in the long run. There is a possibility that it will be required to temporarily expand refugee camps. Nevertheless, it is also necessary to take into consideration the permanent relocation of these individuals who have been displaced. This is especially important in view of the damage that was caused to Gaza as a result of the Israeli ground offensive. It is quite improbable that Sisi will be prepared to acknowledge this. In addition to the fact that Sisi is not the only leader who is concerned about the future, the problem is made much more severe by the fact that the Rafah invasion is scheduled to take place close to the month of Ramadan. Joe Biden, the President of the United States, has expressed his belief that it is essential to revitalize the Palestinian Authority in order to provide assistance in the discussions over the new two-state solution between Israel and Palestine. Despite the fact that it is difficult to envision given the amount of suffering and violence that has occurred in both countries, Egypt has the potential to play a big role in this long-term plan.